The Holy Father arrives. Pope Francis touches down at Andrews Air Force Base for his three-city visit to the United States. Christian Revolution. Will the papal visit to Cuba bring any meaningful change to that communist island nation? Blocked again. Another GOP push to ban late-term abortion is derailed by Senate Democrats. And the world comes to Philadelphia. People from more than 100 nations gather for the World Meeting of Families. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, September 22nd, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Pope Francis begins his historic visit to the United States. He is the fourth pope to come here, the third to visit the White House, and just the first to address Congress. The Holy Father's plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base near D.C. late this afternoon. Our Catherine Szeltner was there as he arrived. Catherine?
Brian, when the papal plane touched down, it marked a first for him. He's never been in the U.S. before. The historic landing also marks a rare occasion, a greeting from President Barack Obama. The first family greeted Pope Francis amid pomp and protocol. President Obama comes to Andrews Air Force Base regularly for travel, but rarely greets other world leaders here. The White House says the president definitely wanted to do this for Pope Francis. The last time a pope visited D.C. was Pope Benedict XVI in 2008. Then President George W. Bush and First Lady Laura also met him at Andrews. Also greeting Pope Francis today, a group of 300 youth and 200 young adults. The nation's capital is a stark contrast to Cuba, where Pope Francis just came from. The 48 hours he spends in D.C. will be the most amount of time he spends in any U.S. city this week, and what is sure to be a memorable visit. Brian.
Catherine Szeltner at Andrews Air Force Base. Thank you, Catherine. Stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Before leaving for the U.S., Pope Francis calls on Cubans to rediscover their Catholic heritage. The Holy Father celebrating Mass at the Shrine of the Virgin of Charity of Cobre, Cuba's patroness. Francis asked Cubans to strengthen the bonds of family, which he calls true spaces of freedom. Cuban President Raul Castro was there to hear Francis use some highly charged language.
Nuestra revolución pasa por la ternura.
The Pope using the term revolution with a radically Christian spin. Alan Holdren was there with the Holy Father and joins us now. Alan?
Pope Francis has been calling the people of Cuba this morning to a revolution of tenderness. That in a place like Cuba, where the revolution has a different sense, of course, that of 1959 that really changed everything here and has led to a situation today of great suffering. I spoke with a family here in Santiago yesterday. They said that the city is empty. People have left. There needs to be a change, they said, and Pope Francis is really calling for that. But he's saying it starts with every person in a revolution of tenderness. Brian?
All right, Alan Holdren, thank you. Montse Alvarado is with the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. She specializes in religious freedom in Cuba. Several people were arrested for approaching the Pope in Havana. Do we have any idea what happened to them after that arrest?
This is what happens in a country with no democracy. You have individuals who are arrested with no due process, and it's up to the government to figure out what it is that they're going to do with them. It's very unfair.
While in Cuba, the Pope met with the Castro brothers. Does that help or hurt the cause for freedom?
It's so complicated, honestly. I think that there are people on two sides. One side says that it was a betrayal of the dissidents in Cuba, and the other side say that it was a personal appeal for the Castro brothers to repent.
So he used the term revolution in a very Christian context. But that term, was it significant that he said that, do you think?
There's a lot of symbols and imagery that he uses, and it seems to be a call to follow with what JP2 began on his visit in being revolutionary in the way that we treat others.
We've heard that the Cuban people really don't connect with Catholicism much anymore. You pointed out in our earlier conversation that when JP2 arrived there, they celebrated Christmas for the first time in 50 years. So a lot of these people really don't know what it's like to be Catholic, do they?
They don't. I think that when you starve people from their religion and you take away any ability to worship or to have free expression, you take what's most innate and what's in our inner forum. You take away the ability to express any kind of belief in God. And people are starving for that in Cuba.
Pope Francis reaches out to young people. He told young Cubans, don't be afraid to dream. He said, keep hope alive. Would you see that as general encouragement or a more specific call to action to them?
I think there's a call to action to find freedom and to search for freedom and fight for freedom. As a Latina, I really feel like everyone else who sees a call in Cuba and is Latin here in the U.S. identifies with them and wants to help them have those rights and help them come to the same freedoms that we enjoy every day.
Montse Alvarado with the Heritage Foundation, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, Senate Democrats block a Republican legislation banning most late-term abortions. It is the second time they've derailed an abortion-related drive by the GOP since the release of the videos exposing Planned Parenthood this summer. Jason Calvi has more tonight.
Brian, the bill would have banned most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy, but it didn't receive the 60 votes it needed to keep it alive.
On this vote, the yeas are 54 and the nays are 42.
Republican presidential candidate Lindsey Graham was the lead sponsor.
We now know that babies at 20 weeks feel excruciating pain. They're provided anesthesia when they're operated on to save their lives. We're saying at that point we should stop abortions.
Every senator in this body knows this bill is going nowhere. This attack is a waste of time.
But Republican Senator James Lankford says the vote keeps the conversation alive.
Yeah, it's remarkable for anyone to say that we're wasting time when we're talking about the life of children. This is a part of what we do. We stand up for the innocent. We stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves.
I stand alone on the word of God.
Micah Pickering's parents support the ban. Micah was born at 22 weeks.
This is a true living testament of what those babies could become. You know, they could be the future president. They could be the future, teacher, and this is what we want them to see, is that this is a valuable life.
Several major polls show a majority of Americans support banning abortions after 20 weeks. But Brian, the Centers for Disease Control says only 1% of abortions take place that far along in the pregnancy.
All right, thank you, Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. The Kentucky clerk refusing to issue marriage licenses to gay couples denies she's homophobic. During an interview with ABC, Kim Davis says she's never said anything hateful. She says she's just a normal person. Her refusal to issue the marriage licenses landed her in jail for contempt of court. In her first interview, Davis says she's prepared to go back to jail for her Christian beliefs. Well, after getting some much-needed rest at the Vatican Embassy here in D.C. tonight, Pope Francis visits the White House in the morning. Melissa Rogers, Special Assistant to the President of the United States and Executive Director of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, joining us from the White House. Melissa, President Obama rarely meets someone at Andrews Air Force Base. Why Pope Francis?
Well, the president has such high regard for Pope Francis, and this is an unusual step for him. But he and the First Lady are just so thrilled to be able to welcome Pope Francis to the United States.
Some of the guests invited to the White House welcoming ceremony are people who really disagree with church teaching. Why were they invited?
We're so pleased that we will have people from across the nation that are associated with the Bishops' Conference and with these fine social service organizations that are linked to the church. We also invited a diverse cross-section of other Americans, both religious leaders and people who aren't affiliated with a faith, but who have high regard for Pope Francis and really enjoy his voice and his leadership and respect him immensely. And they wanted to join, and we wanted them to join, and we know that it will be a very warm welcome.
Melissa, the White House announcing some new initiatives coinciding with common values that the White House shares with the Vatican. What are they?
There's so many, but they include dealing with refugee issues, welcoming refugees and integrating them into our communities, working on extreme poverty around the world, and making sure that people all around the world have the opportunity to really succeed economically and provide for their families, which is something that's so essential to human dignity. We've worked on issues of international religious freedom, and we've worked on issues that relate to climate change and caring for our common home, as the Pope so eloquently put it in his encyclical. So we've been talking about those issues, working on them, and the President's charge to us has been that he wants the visit to have lasting value.
Melissa Rogers, thank you for joining us from the White House tonight.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
Coming up, the World Meeting of Families opens, seeking to strengthen the sacred bonds of family across the globe. And 40 Days for Life kicks off its fall campaign on the Pope's first full day in the U.S. Pope Francis is now safely in the United States. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly special coverage. I'm Brian Patrick. Let's pray that he's getting some good rest at the Vatican Embassy here in D.C. before a busy day tomorrow. Pope Francis's 6-day, 3-city visit to the U.S. actually evolved from a commitment that he made last fall to attend the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. That meeting started today, and Suzanne LaFranchi is there tonight.
Brian, the global event is the world's largest Catholic gathering. It's also the first time it's being held here in the United States. And of course, the big draw is Pope Francis. The thousands of pilgrims here hope to catch a glimpse of their spiritual leader.
Welcome to the World Meeting of Families 2015, and welcome to the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection.
After 3 years of planning, Philadelphia Archbishop Chaput personally welcomed the 18,000 pilgrims from over 100 countries.
The family is the most important thing to have in the society.
The international event seeks to strengthen the family across the globe.
The strength of Africa is in the family, and we are ready to do anything to protect the family.
The conference blends prayer, religious instruction, and seminars. Topics include parenting, dealing with divorce, and caring for children like Elizabeth Bear, who has special needs.
It's critical that all our works of mercy must include children from the first moment of conception right through to natural death.
Thank you very much.
The Bell family made the trip from Ohio.
Hopefully we'll learn some tricks of the trade. Hopefully we'll get them on the right path, and then they can get us into heaven. That's kind of my plan.
The Holy Father will attend a concert here on Saturday. On Sunday, he will celebrate an outdoor mass to end his 10-day trip. Those attending the World Meeting of Families are promised the best seats in the house.
Suzanne LaFranchi in Philadelphia. Thank you, Suzanne. And before his addresses to the United Nations and finally the World Meeting of Families, the Pope speaks to a joint meeting of Congress. Wyatt Goolsbee will be there Thursday morning and joins us from Capitol Hill tonight. Wyatt?
Brian, Vatican officials have yet to say what the Pope will talk about, but our news partner, Catholic News Agency, reports it will likely include immigration and economics. Now, lawmakers face a delicate balancing act since the Pope doesn't fit neatly into any one political camp.
An address to Congress is almost always punctuated by partisan displays, sharply divided lawmakers expressing themselves. And that has some members of Congress wondering what will happen when Pope Francis speaks.
I think that it would be most appropriate to wait to the end to applaud, because I think when members of Congress get up in the middle of a speech, it is to promote their own personal interests, their partisan interests, but I think in doing so, it's using the Pope.
Lawmakers say they welcome Francis' address to Congress, but some of his positions have ruffled feathers on both sides of the aisle. The Pope saw his approval rating drop in the U.S. after comments about capitalism and global warming. Some Republicans are downplaying their disagreements.
Well, the encyclical was broader than just the environment. It was basically about stewardship of what God has given us. Look, there is no one who wants the earth to turn into a trash heap.
Democrats face a similar challenge on the hot-button issue of abortion, which most Democrats support. They're trying to highlight common ground.
There is a concern for human life, and human life is reflected in more than just one issue.
When the Pope speaks, he will be flanked by Vice President Joe Biden and the person who invited him, House Speaker John Boehner, both of whom are Catholic, as well as a third of Congress. Now, all members of Congress face a challenge ahead, welcoming Pope Francis without coming off as opportunists. Brian?
All right, Wyatt Goolsbee, thank you. Pope Francis, as Wyatt mentioned, may advocate for the unborn when he addresses Congress on Thursday. That historic speech comes on the heels of the fall kickoff of a nationwide pro-life campaign tomorrow. 40 Days for Life is a peaceful, prayerful approach to bringing an end to abortion. Through 40 days of prayer, fasting, constant vigil, and community outreach, the biannual campaign seeks to build a culture of life. David B. Wright, National Director of 40 Days for Life, is with us. David, how is it that the timing of the kickoff of the fall campaign coincides with the Pope's visit?
All I can say is divine intervention. This Wednesday of this week of September is always when 40 Days for Life starts, but when we found out that this year it would coincide with the Pope's arrival and his public events in Washington and Philadelphia and New York, we just realized this is a blessing from God.
So with all the attention on the Pope's visit, his presence here, what will that add to our campaign this year?
We're already seeing a lot of impact it's having because, for number one, it's emphasizing the importance of faith in our American life, and the Pope's visit does that so clearly. Another thing is Pope Francis, from the beginning of his pontificate, has really emphasized the marginalized, those who are the weakest and most helpless. And there's no one weaker and more helpless than innocent children in the womb and their mothers and those who've been wounded by abortion. And through his pro-life advocacy, certainly he has raised this issue to the forefront of the public discussion. Abortion is very much in the forefront, especially on Capitol Hill. Yes. How is it that prayer at this time can further that cause? You bet. Well, the videos we've seen recently exposing the brutality of what happens inside Planned Parenthood abortion centers, the failed, unfortunately, Senate vote today on the 20-week abortion ban, they demonstrate to us that there are practical consequences of abortion, but the reality is it's a spiritual crisis and it demands a spiritual solution. With man ending abortion, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. That's why we pray and fast, stand in peaceful vigils outside of abortion facilities during 40 Days for Life, and participate in grassroots community outreach. Together, we can make a difference with God's help to bring an end to this atrocity of abortion. Indeed. David B. Wright with 40 Days for Life. Thank you. Great to be here. Up next, the White House curator who served 7 presidents discusses the short history of papal visits there. And Catholic University of America students celebrate Pope Francis's visit to their campus and a day off. Thank you for joining us this evening for our special continuing coverage of the papal visit to the United States on EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. First, Pope St. John Paul II, then Benedict XVI. Now Francis visits the White House. Different administrations have greeted these different popes, but one man has been there each time, and we talked with him earlier this week. Bill Allman is curator at the White House, and Bill, the church, the Catholic Church, more than 2,000 years old. In comparison, the White House is fairly new. How long have these papal visits been going on?
Well, this will be the 3rd papal visit to the White House. The first took place in 1979 when President Jimmy Carter received Pope John Paul II on the South Lawn, basically right behind where I'm standing here today. How interesting. So Benedict XVI has also been there, and now Pope Francis. Pope Benedict was more the traditional sort of arrival that will take place for Pope Francis out on the South Lawn as a head of state. It involves a 21-gun salute and military band and lots of guests, and then come into the house for a few pleasantries, signing a guest book, exchanging gifts, going back out on the balcony to wave to the crowd, and then off to the Oval Office for some substantive discussion between the president and the Pope. So are these papal visits any different from other world leaders? Well, they're different. The arrival is very similar. I think the fact that the Pope is a spiritual leader as well as the head of state gives him a sort of special status that you don't see with the political leaders or even the nobility kinds of leaders, kings and queens and emperors that come. The Pope is sort of in a class by himself. Indeed he is. Bill, I'm curious, what is the curator, the role of the curator, and do you serve this specific president or the presidency in general? We serve the presidency in general. The curator's office was created by Mrs. Kennedy to interpret the White House as a museum. So we're in charge of all the contents of the house, the fine arts, the decorative arts, the china and glass, historical records, photographs. So this is president number 7 for me, serving in the White House curator's office. What a fascinating job. Bill Allman, curator at the White House. Thanks for joining us. You're very welcome. And here in our studios, Mary Rice Hassan, director of Catholic Women's Forum at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Mary, as Pope Francis left Cuba this morning, he met with families, and he's going to focus on the family here in the United States. How does this build up the domestic church, all of this focus on the family?
I think, first of all, you look at Francis and you look at that joy on his face and that sense that he cares about the well-being of all families, but in particular Catholic families. And so I think that alone is a boost and is an encouragement. But even more than that, I think it was a powerful message he delivered when he was talking about the revolution of tenderness. Because what he's saying to families is, you have, especially families in a place like Cuba where they're oppressed, you have the power to make things better. That change begins in our hearts. And so that's a message that really is for all of us, that we have that power.
You talked about the family being a space for freedom. I thought that was really key too. So what are the key challenges facing families there in Cuba and here in the United States?
You know, I think it's a very similar one. We think we're so different from Cuba, but the challenge is faith. How do you help faith take root in our young ones? How do we spread our faith? And in Cuba, you have a situation where you have a lot of baptized Catholics, but fewer than 10% actually go to church. And it's because they've been worn down not just by the cares of life, but by the oppression of the government. And we think that can never happen here. But our faith has been worn down as well by our struggles, but also by the culture. And so there was a Pew study that came out recently where they were talking about Catholics, and in particular, Catholics who are still going to church, but who are under 30. 40% of them, nearly half, 40%, say that they could envision leaving the church at some point. So that challenge of faith for all of us to deepen the faith and expand the faith is very real.
What do you think families need to hear from Pope Francis at this point?
I think they need to hear, you can make things better. He used that wonderful image, and he's such the Pope of images, but he used the image of the grandmothers in Cuba and talked about how in their homes, in daily life, they kept the presence of God alive and they nurtured that. And so I think his message to families here is realize the power you have, realize the strength you have, nurture that faith, reach out, bring others into that circle.
He's very fond of grandparents, which I love because I'm so happy to be a grandparent. I know his grandmother was very close to him. Right. In the World Meeting of Families icon, we see the parents of Mary, the grandparents of Jesus. What do you think his message to the World Meeting of Families will focus on?
I think it's going to be a little bit broader, but I think it's going to be some of the same themes that we hear from him. Mercy, reconciliation, which, as you know, is very important in the family. I think it's going to be, to us as an affluent society, it's going to be service and the common good. Are we really reaching out to others? But in the final analysis, his message is love. Love for God and bringing that love to others.
From the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Mary Race Hassan, thank you. Tens of thousands converge on the campus of Catholic University of America tomorrow. That's when Pope Francis celebrates the first canonization mass on U.S. soil at the National Shrine. Now, it's no surprise that classes are canceled, and Mark Irons has more from CUA students tonight.
The Pope has landed.
I am so excited.
At the Catholic University of America, students have been preparing for weeks to welcome their special guest. The orchestra is tuned up, and students are dressed down, but Francis shouldn't mind.
And students here at the Catholic University aren't just donning wristbands or wearing t-shirts, they're also brushing up on their Spanish.
Masses in Spanish are helping students prep for the Papal Mass here tomorrow. Many got tickets through a lottery.
I ran up to her and I was like, Katie, I got it. She goes, I got it too.
I called my mom.
I called my mom too.
Pope Francis will hear these sounds from the altar.
There's a great love of this music, a great love of the Holy Father, a great love of the Church, and all of those things are able to come together for us in this Mass as we worship God together.
And if that isn't clear enough,
the Pope is coming. That's awesome.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Indeed, it is awesome. To recap our top story, Pope Francis has arrived safely in the United States, touching down at Andrews Air Force Base shortly before 4 o'clock this afternoon, met there by the first family and so many well-wishers. He has since gone to the Vatican Embassy here in Washington, D.C., where hopefully he will get a very good night's rest before visiting the White House tomorrow and going on to a full day. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We're back tomorrow night immediately following EWTN's live coverage. That is the Canonization Mass for Blessed Junipero Serra at the National Shrine here in D.C. Tonight we leave you recapturing the excitement of the arrival of Pope Francis in the United States today.